Okie doke, we'll get back to the breaking news of the day a little bit later on, but let's talk about something that's been bubbling up really over the past month or so, and over the past couple of weeks. We've heard of this, what the experts are calling a tripledemic, the combination of COVID, the flu, and RSV. And one of our go-to people ever since we started dealing with COVID and all this almost 3 years ago is back with us, Dr. Sarah Crawford. She's a professor of biology at Southern Connecticut State University, and she can basically explain to us in easy-to-understand terms what's going on here. Mr. Crawford, hi, it's Paul again at WICC. Good to have you back. How are you?
Very good. It's great to be back. How are you doing, Paul?
I'm good. I'm good, except I had round 3 of COVID.
I heard that. I didn't want to bring up.
Mild.
Yeah, I didn't want to bring up topics like this, but yes, I had heard all about that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's too bad. Oh my gosh! But you said it was mild. Yeah.
It was, and this was about a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
Only felt really bad for one day. The other 13 or so, I just kept testing positive,
Mm-hmm.
so I was home. My breathing was okay,
Mm-hmm.
but I guess even people like myself who are vaccinated and boosted, that's not unusual, is it?
Unfortunately, it's not. The good news is that at this time in the pandemic, getting sick isn't quite the same story as it was 2 years ago. So thank goodness, you can make a fairly good recovery and in a fairly decent amount of time and not suffer too much, but it's still COVID. It's still a serious disease, but thank goodness it's not what it was before. But it's true that the boosters and the vaccines only go so far, and it turns out that the most recent booster, the bivalent, which was created against the Omicron, BA4 and 5, has very little activity against the newer variants going around right now, the BQ1 and 1.1. So that is really a problem. And it seems as though the severity of the disease is less, both because of the virus and because people have either been vaccinated or gotten COVID or both. So we're not talking about the same pandemic, but we are talking about a serious respiratory illness that continues to baffle us in many ways.
What do you think I was hit with? I mean, obviously we don't know unless you culture it, but what was kind of prevalent, Dr. Crawford, about a month or a month and a half ago in this area? Was it a different variant?
Well,
or not?
It was a transitional time. We were moving from the BA5 to the BQs, and probably you still had the BA5, but it could, at that point, the BQ 1.1 was starting to uptick. I would say if you had it now, you probably had the 1.1, but at that juncture, you were sort of in between. But the main difference between them is that the 1.1 is even almost 10 times more infectious than the BA4 and 5 were. So we are not out of the woods yet in terms of catching COVID.
Yes, and the big Italian wedding I was at was probably a pretty good petri dish. Dr. Sarah Crawford's with us, and Professor Hang-On will be right back with you. So we'll talk about a little bit more about COVID, and when we come back, what's up with the flu this year and RSV. More on that coming up first on the Sixes Traffic and Weather Together right here on WICC.
WICC Right Now Traffic.
95 northbound over 45 minutes from Stamford to Bridgeport to breaks along the way. The Parkway is better. Heavy volume starts in New Canaan. Route 8 northbound residual delays through Shelton from earlier construction. Newtown ongoing construction.
On WICC 600 AM and 107.3 FM.
Talking about the state of disease in this country. What's up with the COVID-19 virus and what they're calling the other two parts of the tripledemic, along with COVID, the flu, and RSV. One of our go-to people on this now for about 3 years, Dr. Sarah Crawford, professor of biology, Southern Connecticut State University. And Dr. Crawford, we get to, I guess, the other two parts here besides COVID, the flu and RSV. A couple of questions. How bad is the flu this year? Do we know if the vaccine is worth anything, how well it's doing it? Number two, for folks who might not know about this, what is RSV?
Okay, I'll take your first question first, which is the flu. And this year, the vaccine is quite well matched to the strain of flu that's prevalent, which is the H3N2. So that's the good news. The bad news is that this is one of the most infectious forms of the flu, and it hasn't been around. The last time it became so prevalent was about a decade ago. And the problem with it is that we had the combination of long-time social distancing with COVID, and people's immunity has fallen really low to other infectious diseases. The fact that this particular strain of the flu is very good at evading the immune system, so it can result in more severe disease. Although the vaccine is very well matched, last year's data showed that there was only about 32% effectiveness of the vaccine overall, and it was the same strain that was circulating, same vaccine. So again, putting all this together, it seems as though the vaccine, as usual, will help decrease the risk of becoming seriously ill, hospitalized, or dying. But again, the overall protection of getting the flu is not so great. And the second part of your question, RSV. RSV is yet another virus. It's different. It affects children, infants and very young children, and older people. So it kind of is a bimodal incidence and can be very severe with both groups, because this particular virus invades the lower respiratory tract. So that's its main target, and therefore can result in pneumonia, bronchiolitis in infants, and very serious complications. So it is potentially a deadly disease in the very young and in the older population. And right now it's exploding, probably again, combined result of social distancing, a long time for people being away from the crowds where these things normally spread at lower levels, and also the fact that it appears that pregnant women who fall into this category, who were not in the public during COVID, which is most of them, don't transmit the immunity to their fetus. So that, therefore, the child is more susceptible shortly after birth. The infant is more susceptible to RSV. So we're seeing a skyrocketing incidence rate, and that's very concerning.
So essentially, Dr. Crawford, our immune systems were like, the pro athletes who basically didn't do any training in the off season, and they jumped right back into competition and were playing catch up.
That's the thing. I mean, if there's no targeting the immune system because we're not exposed to any infectious disease, the immune system essentially, I mean, it's a crude analogy, but goes to sleep in a sense. It's not as armed as it would be and ready to go. So you have that very serious issue. And they're hoping now to develop an RSV vaccine. There are several vaccines that are in clinical trials, particularly for pregnant women, young babies and children, and older adults. But that's a couple of years off. So we're still waiting and dealing with this on a symptomatic basis.
Have you, Dr. Crawford, seen in any scholarly articles or among communication of people in your area? I mean, is there a potential that somebody could get hit with, say, 2 of these at the same time, or 3 of these? Is that at all possible? Any notion that has happened?
Well, I like the fact that you ask very, very good, challenging questions. That is a very important question, and it speaks to a very basic issue in virology, which is called viral interference. And that is that when you're infected with one type of virus, it may restrict or prevent another type of infection. And that's sort of a biological process because one virus changes the target system. And don't forget that these viruses are all targeting pretty much the respiratory system, some certain parts of it. So the fact is that what happens is one virus blocks another. So that's why when you have COVID, you might see less RSV and that sort of thing. But the idea that multiple viruses, therefore, could infect a single person and cause, a catastrophic effect is very, very remote because of this biological interference that seems to go on. It's not fully understood, but it's a very interesting phenomenon.
Interesting. And Dr. Crawford, finally, let's go back to COVID finally here. What do we see on the horizon there? What's the latest on any more new variants and maybe in other parts of the world, and what challenges they may pose in the short term and long term?
Well, Europe is usually a good predictor of where we're going. And so they are in the throes of high levels, BQ 1.1 and 1 now. Our levels are increasing every day. As I said, the booster vaccine really doesn't target that. So we're kind of more susceptible than we might like to be. However, the severity of the infection does not appear to be any greater than some of the more recent variants. The levels are going to increase throughout the winter season. And I think researchers right now are convinced that the only way really to quell this ongoing game of cat and mouse, essentially, with this virus is to develop what's called a universal vaccine, which is a vaccine that would incorporate more components than just the outer spike protein and would be more generalized in the way the immune system reacts to it, so that this more traditional vaccine would give us broad spectrum protection against many different variants. And that really, there is some work being done now in Europe on this and early stage clinical trials. So I think that is the future that will give us more success in controlling this lasting, ongoing war against this particular virus.
Dr. Sarah Crawford, Professor of Biology, Southern Connecticut State University. Dr. Crawford, thank you as always for giving us the update, and have a good holiday season.
Yes.
We will chat down the road. Thank you as always. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Paul. Happy holidays.
You too. Thank you.